Great leaders ask their people, like, they don't ask them what happened to the earnings here. Why'd you mess up? Like, why'd you do this? It was a mistake. 0 times did he do that. And instead, look at that trust and empowerment that he created. What a great way to set culture.
I think you're exactly right. And I think there's a couple things in there. You're hitting on one of them, which we've talked about on the show a bunch recently, is psychological safety.
Yeah.
Creating that psychologically safe environment so people are free to offer new ideas. Free to make mistakes, knowing they're not going to get punished for it if their intention is in the right place. Free to ask for help. All those sorts of things that are so important to high-performing teams. I mean, there's been studies on that. We know that.
Yeah.
But there's a great example of Truett really modeling that. But there's also something in there, or if I practice good improv, yes, and there's something in there that is really, really hard. Really hard. And there's no real good, I'm going to make a pun here, no real good special sauce for this. This is the Workplace Therapist Show. Of course, I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And folks, today's a special show. We've had special shows before, but this one's particularly special. This show is honoring our 250th episode. Can you believe it? That's a lot of episodes. So to help me honor this, I've got my wonderful, beautiful, amazing, talented daughter, Abby Smith, joining me. We are going to pull from some of our greatest hits, some of those episodes and guests that just really stood out for us and are still evergreen today. Abby and I are going to play a clip and reflect on not only the content of that guest, but how it applies to us today. So a nice little jog and journey down memory lane. I hope you enjoy it. And most importantly, thank you for being part of this journey over the last 250 shows. Abby, I'm really excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here.
So 250 shows. Can you believe it? That's a lot of shows. You can believe that.
I can believe it.
That didn't blow your brain. That just seems like a normal thing for you?
Well, it's super impressive. You've been doing this for a while.
I have been doing this for a while. You've been on, how many times have you been on? 2, 3, 4. It depends upon, because we did some pandemic shows.
2 or 3.
There was one just you and me at the kitchen table. There was another one that had you and me and the boys from everyone's rooms during the pandemic.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
And
that would be funny to look back on.
And then we've done several with you in the studio.
Yeah.
To talk about.
We did some generational communication.
Generational communication. That was an early one.
That was, I think, the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was when you'd gotten one of your first jobs as a lifeguard.
First job, yeah.
Way back in high school. Way back in the, can you believe it? That was a long time ago.
I know. I'm so thankful for that job. I probably shouldn't have been guarding people's lives. But I'm so thankful for all that I learned. Yeah, that was awesome.
Maybe that's true.
I couldn't drive, but I was expected to save people who were drowning. You had to drive me every day to work. So thank you also for that. Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. I feel like all those people deserve thank you notes or something for letting
Probably.
Yeah.
I'll write those one day. I'll get around to it.
So today, you and I know the drill, but listeners don't know the drill. So we're going to be going through some of our kind of favorite clips just from these shows. I mean, it's hard to pick favorites. All the shows were fantastic, I think, all the guests at least. I mean, I really loved all their insights, but we got some. So we're going to show the clip. You and I are going to look at it, and then we're just going to kind of talk about our reactions to it.
Yeah.
Because some of these clips, while I love these guests and some are dear friends, I haven't seen these clips in some years.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how we react to them today, because while 250 shows may not seem like a big deal, a lot has changed over that time. We've had a pandemic.
True. That's true.
We've had changes in the workplace. So it'll be interesting to see if our views on the content changes in any way, or if we say, yep, that's probably more true now than ever, or just as evergreen as ever.
I completely agree.
So,
get into it. Who was our first
See, this is my daughter. She does not mess around, folks.
No.
Like, right to it.
No.
Right to it.
I'm not a chatter.
I've already seen her
kidding.
look at her watch a couple times, like, come on, Dad, let's go.
Well,
let's go.
I'm all about efficiency and effectiveness.
Where are you? What were you? Where you learn that term?
It was hard.
Our first conversation. my good friend, Rick Gilkey. So he taught at Emory University in the business school. He's retired, still does some teaching, but he's retired since this clip. And he was, just his expertise was in leadership, but does a lot around even studying neuroscience and how it relates to leadership. So if you were going to take a class in the business school around like emotional intelligence, how the brain works, how it influences leaders and decision making, it was going to be delivered by Rick. And he was well loved as a faculty member, and I always admired Rick. So it's our first clip. So he's going to talk about neuroscience and how it translates to the corporate world.
I'm so excited to hear this.
Yeah. Okay. So I think if we are ready, team, let's go ahead and play Rick.
Goes back to the question you were asking earlier. I mean, what have we learned about neuroscience is useful, and even day-to-day life or managing careers. Part of it is a balance between a certain amount of routine, structure, and predictability. We need that. You need to have routines that work for you, and at the same time, novelty and challenge. And it's that kind of balance that really makes the thing work. And if you go to one extreme or the other, you get either stagnated or disorganized in some ways. And so it's a matter of, and that happens in careers. I mean, if you've got a job that you love, the question is how can you enrich it? How can you expand it so it doesn't become a trap? And that's counterintuitive,
So what happens in our brain when we have that right mix of some level of stability, predictability, plus the right amount of novelty?
Right.
What do you see when you then actually get to use that telescope into the brain and actually see what's going on?
Well, you see there's parts of the brain in the neuroanatomy that are connected to what we call pattern recognition. And it's what allows us to benefit from experience. And so, and that's where there's a literature about this that comes under the heading of wisdom. That you've gained enough experience so you kind of been there, done that, I know how to deal with this. It's a powerful tool, it's a powerful gift, and it works beautifully except when it doesn't. And that's the issue, is that we get so proficient that we keep doing the same thing over and over again. And that was the famous, I think, Einstein quote that stupidity is, or idiocy is doing what you've done before and hoping for different results. So one of the key triggers, and this is where things, I think, like meditation, reflection, quiet time is so valuable. Your brain
Okay. Gosh, I was almost ready for what he was going to say next. I was getting sucked in.
I know, me too. We have to go back and listen to that one.
So, all right. So my takeaway around that, a couple of things I heard in this. One was, again, you got to have this balance of predictability. And I was really today was honing in about routines.
Yeah.
And structure and routines, but also novelty. You got to have those things that are different and some kind of challenge. So you can't be completely unstructured and bouncing all over the place because you're constantly, and I've seen people like that, they're constantly kind of never building.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a basis. But if you're always just following the routine,
you're not going anywhere new.
Ironically, you're also not building.
Yeah.
You're just waking up and going through the same robotic process every day. So my takeaway is we need to re-examine your class schedule right now and think about ways we could do a little more novelty perhaps, or maybe more structure, more what do you think you need?
Well, I think this is great, honestly, because I think this is something that is applicable to everyone, no matter what stage of life you're in. Everyone's always looking for that balance of routine and not. Truly, I think for me right now, I've found myself in too much of a routine during the day, to the point where I get bored, burnt out in class. Yes. I'm on campus a pretty majority of my day, and I feel like I miss out on some of the breaks or the time to get more creative.
Is that changed because you're more of you're a junior now and the classes are getting a little more difficult, or they're requiring more time?
Yes, and it's just the way that I stacked my schedule. I work in the middle of the day in one of the offices on campus, so my classes start at 11 but don't end till 5. So I'm just there for a long time. And then by the time I get home, I find myself tired and kind of missing out on the novelty of being a college student. It's nice because you're supposed to have more time to dedicate to passions and things that are exciting. See,
I think that's an important point that I wish, so here's a nice thing. I wish if I could have Rick back on, which is what I'm planning on doing, everybody. So stay tuned. If I see if I can twist his arm to come back on, I would ask him this question. So novelty is a little too generalized, because sometimes you could pick something that's novel and new, and it's not going to grow you.
Beneficial.
So I was thinking about when you were getting ready to apply for college, one of the classes you took was comp sci.
Yes.
That's novelty.
Yeah.
Was it worth your time?
No.
It really
Actually, though, it was. It really was, because I will say, and I think Rick also kind of talked about this a little bit in like the growth, is that I did that thing that was novel and hard and totally not cut out for me, like totally not for me. But I learned that, and I was able to learn that at the age of 17 versus like trying it later in college and realizing that was just not a good path. So I still think that was beneficial in the long run. Painful in the moment, though. Okay. Beneficial.
So maybe there's benefit to all novelty, but I think maybe the novelty that's probably more ideal is like the one you mentioned, more connected with passions,
which I think ties into with what he was saying about reflection. Like when you take that time to reflect and meditate on yourself and your life, you can really figure out where you should be dedicating that novel time.
Yeah.
It's huge.
And I think a lot of this ties into growth mindset too, right? Making that time so you can grow, and you've got that. I actually see, from a workplace standpoint, most people are stuck in routines. They don't have any time for novelty, and it's not routines that are productive routines. It's firefighting.
Yeah.
So it's not even things that are beneficial, like meeting one-on-one and having a coaching conversation with a direct report, or talking to our team about initiatives. That stuff's not even happening. It's just we're in firefighter mode, which is not. One could argue that's novelty, but there really isn't any. People are just cleaning up messes. They're not building, and so I think there's some takeaways around how do we even structure our time.
Yeah.
So we can do this.
I think that's smart. I had an exam this week, and I was thinking, how much better would my life be if I just every week got each chapter we learned every week like down pat, instead of firefighting at the last minute and then feeling burnt out. I think it's similar to what you're describing in workplaces.
Yeah, I think it's great. Well, it's always ideal if you take it one bite at a time, but you're a college student, so
learning.
Last minute is the way that's how I rolled. All right, so let's go to our next guest. Now, this guest may actually have won the title for most appearances on the show. Could even have beaten you.
Okay.
So, folks, you probably remember Ken Keene. I had him on the show, I can't tell you how many times. Also teaches at Emory's Business School. Unlike Rick, who was a professor with a PhD, Ken came from the military. He was a retired lieutenant general in the U.S. Army, and he has a great career and stories around his time in the military, leading people, and now he teaches that to business school students. So Ken, this particular episode, we talked about leading in times of crisis, and Ken told like an incredible story. So I'm not sure exactly where this clip is going to pick up in this, but why don't we go to the clip and hear from my friend Ken Keene.
Experience you've got and all that wisdom and those leadership times that you've had in your life, and for the leaders listening today that are kind of trying to lead their teams, and while it might not be in a tense situation with nations about to go to war or after an earthquake, they still feel some level of crisis because of things going on in the world right now. What are some things, if we'd sum it up to a couple points, what were some things that would help leaders lead through crisis with their teams now?
First, I would say, you got to be able to lead yourself before you can lead others.
Yeah.
And so this gets to always working to improve your own education, awareness of your strengths, your weaknesses, how to leverage your strengths, and also become more attuned to how to understand others. And that gets to the component of not just listening to them, but truly hearing what they have to say and understanding where they're coming from. So when I look at teams, whether it be an MBA team or an organization, and they come and say, "Hey, we got dysfunction among the team that we're trying to resolve. Can you help us sort of look at this?" Many times, what I see is folks should look in the mirror first and say, "What can I do to help improve this situation?"
Yeah.
What can I do to help the team be a better team, rather than lay blame on others or criticize others? Is look at yourself first. You have to lead yourself first in order to lead others. Then you need to, the next step is, how do I help others in my organization? So I think, the CEOs and the senior leaders who are leading leaders, it's how are they enabling those leaders to be the best version of themselves. Those leaders need somebody to talk to, particularly in times of crisis. So in the immediacy after a crisis, and we've lived through the pandemic now, I think the most effective leaders I've seen are the ones who pick up the phone or set up a Zoom call and just have a discussion with folks. Say, how are you doing? What's going on? What are your biggest challenges? And listening to them, rather than saying, hey, I'm looking at the spreadsheet and you're not producing the revenue this month that you did in previous months. What's going on? Just saying, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
What?
Okay. A lot in there.
That was a lot. That was awesome.
So, why don't you go first? What was it you heard in there that you liked?
Well, I think there were two big takeaways from what he said. First, good leaders have self-awareness, and good leaders focus on themselves and what they can improve. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
I did an exercise recently for a class where I'd ask for feedback
I was
from
thinking
people.
exactly about that when he was
Yes.
talking. I
When
was
he
like,
was talking
Abby's
about
going to
this.
bring up her paper.
I
Did
am.
you finish the paper?
Yeah, I did.
What was
Great.
how many pages was it?
It was about 12 pages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's good. Okay.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I sent it to you. You saw it.
No,
Yeah, I did. I sent it to you, Mom.
I didn't see the final version of it. Anyway,
So that's fine.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah, but it was about 12 pages, that particular exercise that we did in my class, where we asked people, we could pick any people in our lives, so people we've worked for, friends, family, and we asked them what they thought our biggest strengths and what our biggest weaknesses were, and for them to provide examples. And I think this was super eye-opening to me, especially because I saw so much consistency across the board on what my strengths and weaknesses were. And I think after doing that exercise, it's really hard to ask people for what we think we should improve on, or what they think that we need to improve on. But after doing that, I was like, this actually isn't so scary. I see these clear takeaways and I see these patterns. And it really gave me a good foundation for where I want to go. And then secondly, the thing I heard about what he said about leaders was that leaders care about their people. And, he specifically said they're not looking at the spreadsheets as much as they're looking at the people behind them. And I think that that's huge. And just genuinely asking questions is also a huge, I think that seems so intuitive, but how many people do we know actually ask other people questions?
Are you trying to get me to pop off? You're trying to get me to pop off.
No, I'm not.
You're dating me.
I'm not. It's an easy thing I think that we could all benefit from.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
Curiosity is in
Yeah.
rare quantities these days.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you completely. I think you summarized it beautifully. I would add that in that second part where he talks about the people and the team, there was two things in there that I thought he said which were really powerful. One was asking yourself,
Yeah. What can I do?
What can I be doing? What do I need to be working on?
Yeah.
So it goes back to even when I talk about author versus
so
editor.
easy to finger point.
Yeah, yes. So rather than blame someone else, and whether we're in a relationship with someone else or teammates or team members or whatever the situation might be, the dynamic,
Yeah.
rather than being like, well, it's your fault, okay,
Yeah.
to say, well, I need to take ownership,
Yeah.
show initiative, and display critical thinking, the traits of the author, right, to do that. So I think there's
Yeah.
that piece. And then the second thing he said was, and then once you've kind of done that, how can you make yourself available for the team too? So not only
Yeah.
take ownership of the things you need to be doing, but also create that space so when they have issues or challenges as a leader, they can come to you. And sometimes even reaching out and saying, I just want to check in. How are you doing? Not just talk about the spreadsheet, but how are you doing? So I thought that was really good. First, the self-awareness, then the ownership to take action on it, and then create that space.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Totally.
Are you ready for the next one?
Let's hear it.
Next one's a little different. So we're going to go down a little different path, folks. We're going to talk to Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith, and we are going to be talking about rest. So Abby's going to say this. In our family, we don't do this as well as we probably could.
No.
So we're going to talk about the importance of rest. And
Yeah.
she wrote a book called Sacred Rest.
Cool.
Yeah.
Where is she based out of?
You know, it's a good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I wish I could answer that question for you.
Okay. I think I might have heard her on another podcast.
Maybe
if I
she'll
was
tell
asking.
us in this clip.
Cool.
Did you like how I tease that?
Yeah.
I've been doing this about 250 times.
Let's hear it.
So here we go. So do you see common patterns with senior leaders or just leaders in general? I mean, the folks that come to talk to you, are there certain ones of these when she or he talks to you about their role that you say, oh, I bet they're going to bring up these?
My coaching clients, usually the number one and number two, because most of them are entrepreneurs, or they're I call high achievers. They're people who are out there getting stuff done. So they are really going at life, and they have a lot of balls in the air almost all the time. And so the two that tend to stand out the most for them are the emotional rest and the creative rest. Emotional because they are always on. They are always in front of people. You know, they're presenting, or they're showcasing something, or they're in publicity doing something. So they're always feel like that they're on. And it's really important for them to get to a place of understanding the benefit of healthy relationships, and not just downplaying that as kind of, I'll get to that when I have time. I think that, the worst thing that can happen as a leader is to get success in every area, but have your home life fall to pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. So while you were speaking, I had a question come in from my studio, but I couldn't hear it perfectly. So I'm going to ask them. So production studio, what was the question that you wanted me to ask? Okay, so the question was tell us a little bit more about the difference between working from rest rather than to rest.
Well, that's the misconception of our culture right now. I think most of us have really grown up in this culture of thinking, I will work, and then once I get the work done, then I'll have time to rest. The problem with that is the work will never be done. There will always be work to do. And that what we're missing in that, and what's led to really this culture, this burnout culture we currently live in, where most people hate their jobs and feel like, if I can only get to a point where I don't have to go to work. Well, work was never supposed to be a bad thing. The problem is we have really misappropriated the work-rest ratio. The way it was supposed to originally be was that we didn't work to earn our rest, but we worked from a place of rest. That rest is really where we got filled up, so that once we're filled in all of these 7 buckets, we're able then to pour out into the world the best of ourselves. Whereas most of us now, we're working from a place where we are pouring out into the world from our leftovers. And then we wonder why we're not excelling and exceeding in all of the different ways that we could.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think, Abby?
Great stuff. And I think what's cool about all 3 guests that we've heard from so far is that so many of their ideas go hand in hand with one another.
Oh, yeah, say more.
Yeah. Well, we heard about how important reflection is and how important it is to take time to meditate. And now we're hearing about the importance of rest. And I think those 2 things really go together. And working from a place where a full cup instead of an empty one. I think that was great.
So one thing that stood out for me was she kind of changes the order in our mind of how we think about rest.
Yeah.
We think work is priority, and then rest is like when we have extra time at the end, we do that.
Yeah.
She's saying it's supposed to be the other way around. Rest is actually supposed to be the priority, and then once you're full, then you can go work. But you're not supposed to go work until you're full. Versus most of us, at least.
Yeah.
In this country, tend to work from wherever the tank is.
Yeah.
So you're constantly on E or yellow or whatever, and you're working.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think when I think about that, I think one thing I could probably do more of is be more intentional about exactly the time I go to bed and exactly the time I get up every day. I don't think I have a good consistent routine with that. I mean, it's gotten roughly more the same recently, but it tends to vary too much. Now, it doesn't make it easier when your brother's working and he gets home late from working at a restaurant and we want to stay up and talk to him.
Well, there it goes with routine and novelty again, too. balancing that, especially with rest. It's important to incorporate rest into your routine, but also do things that are novel and different.
Nice tie-in. But I would also say that that's probably, rest probably isn't something you want to treat as a category of novelty. It should probably be a routine.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
A routine for that, and then
but
be
I think
structured
the
and
novelty
scheduled.
can also be a form of rest. Doing things that are passions for you, or things that are exciting to you and give you joy. I think that is a form of rest.
Yeah, and she talked about in this clip kind of the emotional or relational side of it too, and that doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same conversation.
Yeah.
With the people you care about every day. That's not going to be that. While that's a routine, it lacks the dynamic nature of relationships. So you have to create some space for novelty.
Yeah.
So you create space for the conversation, but also you don't know where it's going to go, which bleeds into things like curiosity.
Yeah.
And being able to be vulnerable and not know where that conversation's going to go, and that's okay. Yeah. Okay, so my laptop went quiet on me, so I'm waking it back up again. And we're going to go to our fourth guest. Are you ready?
I'm excited.
Okay, so we're going to shift a little bit from rest. And maybe this could tie in. We're going to talk a little bit about another form of renewal, food.
Awesome.
Food. So we're going to talk to Steve Robinson.
Cool.
He was the chief marketing officer for Chick-fil-A. And he wrote a book called Covert Cows. And I loved having Steve on because not only did he talk about the growth of that business and the history of Chick-fil-A, but he also talked about some of the real conversations that he had with Kathy, who was the owner and founder.
Yeah.
And how through that collaboration, they did things that initially Truett was more reluctant to do, like waffle fries, or even opening up for breakfast. That was not something Truett was excited about. They make good chicken sandwiches. He kind of wanted to stick to that recipe, routine. But Steve convinced him a little novelty can be beneficial for the business. So why don't we hear from Steve?
We hire it.
Interesting.
The most
Profound.
important, this was the last thing he said, the most important thing we do here is decide who we invite into the business. So I had a cultural crash course during an interview.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how important it was until I started working there. And as the years unfolded, I always went back to that interview with Truett.
So just to set up the show for folks listening, the way that we're going to do this show is we're really going to kind of walk through.
Screwing it up already?
No, this is going to be beautiful because we're going to start at the beginning, and I really want this to just be a fun story about hearing some of those big moments in your career.
Well, we started at the beginning.
We did. It was a perfect starting place, and some of those things that are just maybe commonsensical to you because you experienced it, but so different for the rest of the world. And the starting story was a great nugget of that.
Yes.
Most folks don't do that.
Yes,
most folks say we'll hire somebody and we'll then train culture.
Well, that's why I said it was a paradigm buster for me, because at Texas Instruments and then Six Flags, the priority around selecting people was their skill set.
Yeah.
And what can they do in terms of performance to push the business ahead? I understand that. But what I learned not only in that interview, but subsequently really learned as I came to work with Truett and Chick-fil-A was what Truett was really telling you, we care about competency, but we care even more about chemistry and character.
Yeah.
Can you work with people? Can you create fellowship, not because of position power, but because people enjoy following your leadership, trust your leadership? And are you someone that we can trust in terms of your character, your judgment, your word is your word?
Yeah.
If I have those things, I think that's what Troy was telling me. If I have those things, then I don't want to do whatever it is you need to do, and I'm going to empower you. And that's exactly what he did. I'll jump to another nugget.
Okay.
I was there 35 years, and you know how many times he brought me into his office to say, Steve, you screwed up, or I do not understand why you did that.
How many? Oh, big fat zero.
Zero.
Okay.
Now, as I tell in the book, I made some mistakes, some of them doozies, and even some of those were points of learning that were kind of mind-boggling. But he never did anything to undermine my confidence and his trust in me. And as a result of that, over the years, I felt the freedom to think outside the box, to bring kind of fast food paradigm busting ideas to the table, whether it was menu ideas or marketing ideas or sponsorship ideas or even how we structured the marketing plan, the evolution of the plan. He never once fundamentally asked me anything other than this: do you think it'll be good for the business and our reputation?
Oh, nice.
He trusted.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, you look like you got something to say, Abby. You're pointing with your finger.
I think that's another great tie-in, though. Look at what we heard about leadership earlier.
Yeah.
You know, great leaders ask their people, like, they don't ask them what happened to the earnings here. Why'd you mess up? Like, why'd you do this? It was a mistake. 0 times did he do that. And instead, look at that trust and empowerment that he created. What a great way to set culture.
I think you're exactly right. And I think there's a couple things in there. You're hitting on one of them, which we've talked about on the show a bunch recently, is psychological safety.
Yeah.
Creating that psychologically safe environment so people are free to offer new ideas. Free to make mistakes, knowing they're not going to get punished for it if their intention is in the right place. Free to ask for help. All those sorts of things that are so important to high-performing teams. I mean, there's been studies on that. We know that.
Yeah.
But there's a great example of Truett really modeling that. But there's also something in there, or if I practice good improv, yes, and there's something in there that is really, really hard. Really hard. And there's no real good, I'm going to make a pun here, no real good special sauce for this. Notice, by the way, how I said nuggets twice in that clip?
Yeah.
I said, see?
You're really going in for the nuggets.
I said nuggets twice.
You're like another great nugget.
That was punny. That's really punny.
It was clever. Good.
Thank you, Abby. She appreciates my humor, folks.
Yeah.
So really hard, though. How do you hire and select on character?
True.
You know,
You're right.
and kind of some of those personality traits.
Yeah.
You know, really, really hard to do, because you're wanting to select someone that's a good fit and has the right character that you value. But that's just in chemistry. But that's really hard. So I think that's one of the things that's really challenging. I mean, you can try and create interviews that do that, but we all know there's some folks that show up really well for some of those interviews, and then as soon as they get in the door, it just doesn't always work out the way you hope.
Yeah.
So
I get that.
I'm going to ask a random, it sounds random, but actually you have experience in this, more experience than you think.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about sororities and fraternities.
Well, I definitely have experience. It doesn't sound random.
So I know, but it sounds like a
I get where you're going with
tangent
this.
from workplace, right?
Yes.
But you know, given you've been at the University of Georgia, right, which is a very big Greek
life.
culture, okay, and lots of sororities. How many sororities are there?
19?
Yeah, so a lot.
Yeah.
Right?
I wanna say
And then
19.
fraternities, maybe not that many, but a lot too.
Yeah.
Right? And so a lot of people get involved and they go through the rush process, and it's selecting. You're selecting for chemistry fit, right? Maybe even character too. But you're selecting.
It is chemistry.
So how do you, if you think about that process, what were some things that maybe you learned in that process that are really effective, that work to help you identify those people that you want to bring into the sorority that you know are going to kind of just fit in really naturally and seamlessly?
So sorority recruitment is a mutual selection process. So it would be the girls wanting to be in the sorority just as much as the sorority wants the girls to be there. So for me, I was involved in our recruitment process last fall, and I thought it was really important that we displayed very clearly what our values were and what we were looking for. I encourage that girls do this through storytelling. That was huge for me. I wanted the girls going through recruitment to get a really good understanding of what the girls in my sorority were like through telling stories that demonstrated it, and paying very close attention to how the girls reacted. What was their body language like? How did they talk about stories? What did they tell about themselves? So for me, the kind of acronym, or like the 3 things that I said that we should look for are kind, confident, and comfortable. So if the girls showed up in that way...
Did you come up with that?
I did come up with that.
Did
I was
you
proud.
really?
I did. Yeah, and if girls showed up that way, then, you know, I encouraged we move along in the process. I don't want to give away too much information, but yes. Yeah.
Nice. So you wanted to promote values, you wanted to tell stories,
Yeah.
and then see how the candidate reacted to that.
Yeah.
And if they reacted in kind of a kind, confident, and comfortable kind of manner,
Yeah.
and maybe even reciprocated with a story of their own,
Yeah.
then it seemed like it was going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
But if they seemed like a little hesitant or
Yeah.
just not on the same page, then
Yeah.
they could find another home. And now,
Totally.
what makes it a little unique is eventually they're all going to find a home, right?
Yeah.
Or that's the way the system is set up, at least.
Yes. Yeah.
So there should be, well, of the 19, they should find their space. So not like a normal job candidate.
No.
But still,
Yeah.
I think that process you gave is great. Okay, so nice. Going back to some good nuggets here with sauce. Good nuggets and sauce around selecting the right folks.
Yeah.
And then creating those kind of high trust environments.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do one more. Okay.
Let's hear it.
So this is also a Robinson, but a different Robinson. So this is Mazi Robinson. So Mazi's a licensed therapist, and she is going to be talking about, and I've had her on twice, and she's going to be talking about anxiety and exhaustion. So some of the things that people felt during the pandemic, and maybe even
Today.
maybe
yeah.
even more so post-pandemic. I mean, there's still some folks that are struggling to kind of re-engage, and they've got some challenges
Yeah.
around some of this, and some folks that have re-engaged, but for lots of reasons, they're overwhelmed. So you can almost see how these come in hand in hand. You got one person who says, I'm not ready. So this person goes back to work, and they said, well, you got to do both their job and your job. And then they go, well, I'm exhausted. So she's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So why don't we go to the clip with Mazi? So every year I try and pick a word of my favorite word of the year. Like, this is my word of the year. And the last 2 years I've had the same word. And the word that is my word of the year this year, is the same for last year, is agency.
Oh,
Okay, I can tell you like this word.
I like that word, yes.
Because part of what you're talking about really is people don't have a sense of agency.
Yes.
They don't have a sense of what's in my control.
Yes.
You know, and how do I kind of feel that comfort, that agency? Like I'm enough for the world. You know, I'm not overwhelmed by it. I'm enough. So how, maybe this is a big question. Maybe this is $1 billion question. How do you get that? How do we help people reclaim that or rediscover that?
And that is the big question. You know, I, over the past couple of years, I've spent so much time reading about COVID and its impact on our mental health and where we go from here. And I think part of the reason I keep reading is because I keep hoping that somebody will have a better answer than the answers that I'm reading. But the answer that I keep coming back to, and how do we take care of ourselves? How do we safeguard our mental health right now? And it comes back to this idea of agency, identifying what you can and you cannot control. I cannot control this person next to me who doesn't believe the way I do, who doesn't behave the way I think they should behave, but I can control myself. I can control how I respond. I can control how I internalize what that person's doing. I can control if I stay in this job. I can control my mindset around this job. And you know, we really resist identifying what we can and can't control because we want to put all of our energy inevitably towards the things we can't control, right? I just want to ruminate over this person who's driving me crazy, and I want to ruminate over my boss and how I think they're not leading the company well, and I want to ruminate over these family members that are driving me crazy. And we put all of our energy there rather than recognizing, yes, there is so much in this world that I can't control, and it can be big, scary stuff, but there's actually a ton that I can control. I can control when I get up in the morning and if I run late, and then if I'm stressed in traffic. There are things that I can control. And so really, you know, almost like setting a firm internal boundary with ourselves of, let me get real clear. What can I control and what do I need to release and surrender? And I just have to every day or every hour just keep putting those things down, just keep putting my boss down, just keep putting the family member down, and let me focus on what it is that I can control.
Okay, good way to kind of tie into some of the other themes that we've had.
Yeah, this is awesome.
So here's what I'll jump in first,
Yeah,
and then you can build off it. I loved what she said about ruminating. Whatever you ruminate on grows. So it's this idea that, you know, the more you kind of think about that thing, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so don't ruminate on things either outside of your control or they're going to put you in a frame of mind that's less than productive.
Yeah.
So thinking more about the things you can control. And it ties into some things we heard earlier around self-awareness.
Yeah.
From Ken Keene, but also this idea of, just kind of that ownership, initiative, critical thinking, focusing on, how do I want to show up? How can I be more productive? Those were some of the things that were bouncing around my head when I heard Mazi talk.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's funny, there's the psych term, locus of control.
Yeah.
And depending on where your locus of control falls on the spectrum, that can have huge outcomes and impacts on your life. I think this was really interesting too, because she identified like the two buckets that we should all look at daily, like what we can't control, because it's so easy to think that everything is either out of our control. But I think it's also easy to sometimes go the other way and think that everything is in our control.
That's a great point, Abby.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes easy to think like, well, if I XYZ, I can convince person ABC to behave like this. Or if I did XYZ differently, then maybe this would have been different in my life. And those things are easy to ruminate on too.
Yeah, you hit on a couple key points there. One is looking back at things that have already occurred, which again, we can't control that. It's already happened.
Yeah, you're right.
That's going to lead to regret, perhaps, or other kind of forms of kind of cancer to the soul. We don't like that. And then you also hit on there are things sometimes we are delusional about.
Yes.
That we think is within our control.
Yeah.
So. One of the guests we had on more recently, who's be a regular guest, is a good friend of mine. He's retired, Len Laritz. And I sat down with Len in his house some years ago after he had retired, and we were talking about some things. And I came back the next day, and he said to me, you're delusional. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. And he was, and his point was, he said, you think you can control certain people's feelings based on what you do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a common trap that I think a lot of us fall into, that we think either, people have control over our feelings. They did this thing and made me feel this way. Or I can do this thing and make them feel something. We can have no control over someone's feelings.
Yeah.
Now they can,
it was really interesting. I had to take a test about locus of control. I scored extremely high that I have an internal locus of control, like the top percentile. Like I think pretty much everything is in my control, and if I do certain things, like I can change, and that's not true.
Is that the stage of is that delusional when you get
delusional.
to that?
That's what it is.
Okay.
It's delusional.
Well, you come by it honestly.
I do.
I think that's the
what
phrase.
I'm hearing.
I think that's the phrase.
But I think it goes both ways, and I think kind of getting yourself in the middle and kind of grounded in a very like balanced way when it comes to things in your control and outside of your control. I think that is really important.
Yeah, this is good. Well, how are you feeling today on the show?
Feeling great. It's
good.
Been a good show. I've loved watching these.
I'm so thrilled. I did that for you. Oh, wait.
You made me feel this way.
Yes, I did. Oh,
did you or did I bring the positive attitude and make it this way? No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe you and I still have some work to do.
We'll get there.
Yeah. Abby, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
This was a blast.
Yeah, it was.
Again, we'll keep doing it. Now, you got a little competition from family members. Like now Aaron is like chomping at the bit to get on the show.
I know.
Got his first job, so now he's feeling ready to come in and
I'm excited for him though.
Throw around some workplace wisdom.
Yeah, I'm sure he's gonna have some stories from this job he has. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be really fun for him.
If you work anywhere with other human beings, stories are inevitable.
True.
Inevitable.
True. Yeah, it'll be good for him though. Super exciting.
We'll have to do this again.
Yes, of course.
I hope you enjoyed that journey down memory lane as much as I did. I always love having my daughter on with me. Just great to not only spend time with her, but get her experiences and reflections on where she's at on some of this content from our guests. But again, most importantly, I couldn't have gotten to 250 shows without you. So thank you so much for not only your involvement and your engagement as a listener, but always providing great feedback and thoughts on future guests. Keep those coming, and let's look forward to another 250.